There was a major, monstrous prison riot in Ecuador last week on the 29th. The numbers are staggering. The Associated Press reported that over 100 inmates were killed and that over 80 were wounded. To be clear about those numbers, and I want to repeat them, the Associated Press reported that more people were murdered than were wounded. Just to drive home the point really clear that these were deliberate murders, executions, a number of inmates, I saw figures between 5 and 10, were beheaded. You see, the problem is that there was a gang war, two of the rival gangs in Ecuador. And I guess one gang, in whatever manner, managed to take control of the facility for a little while and execute the members of the losing gang in the war. This sounds like the type of thing that can only happen internationally, abroad, is what Americans, many first world people, think of it. It couldn't happen where I live. But to a lesser degree, this does happen in California prisons, in American prisons, and certainly in other systems too. I had a friend who looked out for me whenever I was at Chowchilla. And he had done time both in Mexico and in the US. He was in on an ICE hold. He was a known gang member. He was going to be deported. He talked about whenever he had been working his way up in the gang as a Mexican national, somebody who lived in Mexico. And he explained that he had a number of times moved product across the border, drugs, and that it was just understood you were going to get caught occasionally. That you would start by moving a small amount to demonstrate that you were trustworthy, and that at some point they were going to quit giving you the good stuff and give you some garbage, and then tell on you, and you would get arrested and get caught. And that this was just part of the process of working your way in the ranks, and that doing time in Mexican prison as somebody who was there for the gang, it was not a bad situation to be in. A story that he told, and I can't speak to the veracity of it, I didn't go through the guy's paperwork, but he was consistent in the story he told, and he seemed honest because he tried to play it up like this was something he was proud of, something he had done. But he looked a little haunted. He got quiet whenever I asked for details. You see, apparently the prison he'd been housed in, there had been a riot. And part of the riot had been intended so that gang members could gain access to some equipment and then assault and kill a couple of rival gang members and a sex offender that they particularly wanted to get at, who were housed in the facility in protective custody, essentially. That they had managed to get access to some of the equipment that was used in construction and then cut through a door and murder the people behind the door. He expressed that he had been one of the guys who held down the sex offender while he was violated prior to his murder. And we were speaking about this because of the nature of the offense that I was in for. And again, he did sound proud. He sounded like, well, I did something, but he also sounded haunted. I got the real feeling that if he hadn't had his other gang members, his compatriots, if it hadn't been an organized event with a criminal agenda, he wouldn't have done this stuff on his own, and that he probably had nightmares about it, or at least regretted it. Whenever I was in the PMU, that's the Placement Management Unit at High Desert, it was a pretty specific and unique place to be, because it was an SNY place, meaning that it was all people who couldn't cohabitate with the active gang members any longer. But it was also people who recently rolled up, who became SNY, dropped out of the gang within just the past couple of weeks or month or two. The whole unit. And the reason why is because High Desert had been chaotic at the time. A lot of people were hurt, some people died, and a lot more people saw what was going on and went, I gotta get out of here. Even some people who had been active in gangs for a long time, so it was a unique environment. There was an occasion where I was sitting with two friends of mine. I was the porter, the other guy was the MAC rep, Mark. He was in 50s, and one other gentleman. And a door popped which shouldn't have. It just magically opened. Perhaps it was accidental that that door opened. Those officers sit up in that tower all day long, and it's not the type of thing that you can lean against the console and accidentally press a button. Most of the switches are very clearly labeled, and you have to flick up the cover and then press the button to open a cell door. That said, if you are opening cell doors all day long, you're opening this door and that door, it's quite possible that you could accidentally press one button when you meant to press another. Conversely, if you're working all day long, pressing buttons up in that tower board, it's possible that you could just decide to press the button that separates the SNY inmates, the guys that are hiding from the gangs, from a couple of active gang members. And this did happen to myself, my friend Mark, and one other gentleman. You see, I was the porter, so I was out moving around, and I had a broom. Mark didn't have any weapons or anything like that, but he's about 50, and he'd been in the gangs a long time. He's a tough guy. I would have wanted to stand shoulder to shoulder to him, I guess, if I had to. He's one of the guys I would have picked. And then a friend of ours. Whenever the door opened, we could see the other side. There were 5 inmates. And the door swings open a little bit by itself. All the cop did was disengage a magnetic lock, so it's no longer locked. The door is so heavy it opens, and it's very loud. You hear it disengage. And we all looked up, Mark, myself, our friend, and the 5 guys in the room. And there was this moment where you had to analyze. Were they going to come for us? Were we going to come for them? Because it's supposed to be on site. This is the rule with active gang members. Somebody you're supposed to go after? Well, you better go after them, because otherwise they might come after you. It was a pregnant moment. Lasted for, I'm going to say, at least 45 seconds before one of the guys slowly walked over and closed the door. It clicked, and now the door is locked. We couldn't open it if we wanted it to. If there had been 100 guys in that chow hall, if it had been a giant gang, they probably would have come through, and this wouldn't be a story about a close call I had. It would be a story about a time I ran away from 100 people, and the gunner was shooting his gun, and I maybe got beat to death, or at least got crippled. And it wouldn't have been because 1 or 2 or 10 of these guys really wanted to hurt me because I was in the wrong group. It would have just been because if you get enough of them together, they have to follow through. I guarantee you those 5 active inmates that had an opportunity to come get us, they didn't tell anybody. It's not a story they went out on the yard and told, because they have that plausible deniability. They can pretend it didn't happen. I'm so upset about what happened. Over 100 people executed. And it's easy to have this attitude that what happens in prison stays in prison. By that, I don't mean to say that it's a secret, like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, nobody talks about it. I mean, nobody cares. Especially in international prison, so far away. But I guarantee you those 100 and something men who were killed, many of them died cowering behind doors, afraid. Many of them were tortured before they died. Some of them were hardened gang members and criminals who would have done the same to the people on the other side if they could have. But here's the thing about those groups like that, is that there's also a lot who just joined the group because they thought it would make them safer. Whenever you're standing with your 20 friends and you're all tough and ready to defend yourselves, of course you're safe. Until they start cutting off heads because that other group with their 40 friends have decided they don't want you around anymore. They're going to get rid of you. The PMU, which is such a small example, such a petty example of this type of violence, where we're behind a wall and if they could, they'd kill us because that's the rule. There were occasions where we were able to talk with the inmates on the other side of the wall. And as individuals, they rarely had any animosity towards us, unless Frank happened to know Bob because Bob's the guy that told on him, or unless somebody happened to be there for something appalling. I don't have a succinct lesson, something to take away for this in your everyday life. I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about over 100 men who were executed because they were members of the wrong group in prison. Thank you for listening today.